Good evening. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And thank you for your support as the 1854 Foundation continues to develop new programs and implement new projects. I'm Fran Garvey, Chair of the 1854 Foundation. We're thrilled to bring you this encore presentation of our inaugural speaker event featuring the evolution of the St. Martin's Golf Course. The Foundation Speaker Series will continue on a regular basis, spanning a variety of topics relevant to you and the Foundation's mission. Already, we have had several people suggest topics for future events, and we encourage you to share your ideas. You can drop them in the chat or contact us via the website, 1854foundation.org. Please do take time to visit the website and learn more about the Foundation's genesis, our work, and our board members. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't also note that we are a 501c3 organization committed to making an impact via our programs, sponsorships, scholarships, and projects. We're most appreciative of your support and hope that you will consider a donation, which can be made directly through the website, a check, or through a donor-advised account. And for our club members, we hope that you will consider and continue to support our work through the annual stewardship donation. Now that my shameless ask is out of the way, we're excited to kick off this speaker series with Chris Kalmeyer's presentation of the development of the St. Martin's campus and the evolution of the golf course. Chris and his fellow Heritage Committee members have done an extraordinary job researching the club and its rich history. Chris's presentation tells an intriguing story of how the club came to be and how the St. Martin's Golf Course has transformed over the past 130 years. Please join me in welcoming Chris Kalmeyer.
Thank you, Fran. Hello, everybody. All right. We want to thank some folks here before we get started. So, of course, thank you to Fran and thank you to the 1854 Foundation. We also want to thank Lila and her team for helping us prepare for this presentation, this encore presentation. So I have the honor of presenting on behalf of the Heritage Committee. The Heritage Committee includes Powell Arms, our chair, Rob Neidick, John Burns, and others who help us with our work. We want to give special thanks to Rob Neidick for his painstaking research over the last several years, which was really the basis for what you're about to see here today about the history and the tracing of the history of the St. Martin's course. The goal of the Heritage Committee is to first gather and preserve the long and rich history of the Philadelphia Cricket Club, and then, of course, to share this history, which deepens our sense of appreciation to be part of such a wonderful club and transmits this deeper appreciation for generations to come. So we are very thankful for every opportunity that we have to share our club's heritage. Quick note about questions. As we go through this, you may have questions. Please drop them into the chat. We'll be monitoring questions in the chat, and we'll make sure that we answer them along the way or at the end. So every story needs a central character, and the central character of today's story is our St. Martin's Golf Course, which is an integral part of the history and heritage of the Philadelphia Cricket Club. At a high level, we know the basic facts. The course was built in 1895, initially 9 holes, expanded to 18 holes in 1898. It continued to evolve leading up to the 1907 and 1910 U.S. Open. It was renovated, lengthened, and rerouted by Donald Ross in 1914, later reduced to 9 holes in 1925. In 1963, the current 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were added, and in 2013, the course was renovated, giving us the beautiful course that we have today, which is now recognized as one of the best short courses in the United States. But beyond these basic facts, we have questions. What is the deeper history of the St. Martin's Golf Course? What was the historical context leading up to its creation in 1895? What do we know about the initial course and where it sat? And how did that course and layout evolve through the various stages over the years? Finally, how does today's course relate to the earliest stages of the golf course? These are some of the questions that we'll try to answer today, so let's dive in. First, we want to start with some historical context to understand what was happening in the years leading up to 1895, converging to the moment when the club decided to build its first golf course. As we all know, the club was founded in 1854 by a group of cricketers under the leadership of William Roch Wister. With no field of their own, the club played matches against clubs who could provide a home pitch. In the 1850s, at about the time the club was founded, the population of Philadelphia was about 100,000 people. By the 1890s, driven by the Industrial Revolution, the population of Philadelphia grew to about 1 million people. At that point, it was the second largest city in the United States, and we led the world in textile production, along with finished goods, including things like carpets, blankets, boots, shoes, and hats, along with iron, steel, rail equipment, and shipbuilding. With mills and factories throughout the various neighborhoods of Philadelphia, Philadelphia was considered the workshop of the world, which also led to crowded urban living conditions. Meanwhile, by the 1880s, cricket remained a very popular pastime, and there were several cricket clubs that existed throughout the Philadelphia area. By this time, the Philadelphia Cricket Club had existed for 30 years without a home field, until Henry Houston provided a home for the club in 1883. Houston was a member of the club and a leading figure of the era who made his fortune with the Pennsylvania Railroad. With that fortune, he acquired large tracts of land in the early 1880s on both sides of the Wissahickon Creek in what is now Chestnut Hill and Upper Roxborough. He began developing his vision for a residential neighborhood that he called Wissahickon Heights. His vision was a country getaway from the cramped and diseased conditions of the city, which had become increasingly worse as a result of urban growth driven by the Industrial Revolution. Wissahickon Heights would be known for its tree-lined streets, stately homes, and proximity to the Wissahickon Valley. Today, our restaurant at the St. Martin's Clubhouse is called The Heights in recognition of Houston's original vision and his crucial role in the history of the club. In 1883, Houston leased 7 acres to the club at $1 a year between Willow Grove Avenue and Hartwell Lane. As shown here, this provided enough space for the cricket pitch, the clubhouse, and a grandstand, along with additional space behind the clubhouse. Houston believed the presence of the club would enhance the Wissahickon Heights community. In 1884, Houston built and opened the Wissahickon Inn on Willow Grove Avenue, just across the street from the club, to give visitors a place to stay during their country getaway in Wissahickon Heights. Today, the Wissahickon Inn still stands as part of the SEH campus. Houston also used his influence to establish a commuter rail line which connected his new neighborhood to the city. The Philadelphia Cricket Club and the Wissahickon Inn would become the social center for Houston's growing neighborhood, all of which was a short train ride away from the overcrowded city. Just a couple of years later, golf arrived in America, starting in 1888 at St. Andrews Golf Club in New York, where they built a 3-hole course. And just a few years later, in 1893, Chicago Golf Club built their first 9-hole course. That same year, Newport Country Club in Rhode Island built a 9-hole course. And here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Country Club built the first golf course, a 9-hole course, at its original location at the base of City Line Avenue near the Schuylkill River. In this picture, the road on the right is City Line Avenue, and you can imagine that this tee shot may land roughly where the Chick-fil-A is, or perhaps a little further down by the Target. This brings us to 1895 and the emergence of our club's first golf course. Remember, at the time in 1895, activities at the Philadelphia Cricket Club included cricket and tennis, and here we can see the original clubhouse, which was built in 1885. On May 7th, 1895, the board of directors formed the first golf committee and tasked it to build a golf course in response to the game's growing popularity in America. The committee was chaired by Samuel Huebner, who eventually became the co-founder and president of the Golf Association of Philadelphia and served as the treasurer of the USGA. The club leased additional land from the Houston family at that point to build what was called the Wissahickon Links. The course was laid out by Sanders Hanford, who was the golf professional at the club, and it opened for play on October 26, 1895. The course played across fences, roads, and natural hazards to putting grounds that were 40 feet square, and the course measured a little over 2,400 yards. But what do we know about the location and routing of the original course? Fortunately, a map of the original course shown here was published in a book called Through the Greens by Prosper Sennett in 1898, showing the routing of the holes and the hole distances. To make this a little bit easier to read, we've restored this map, as you see here. And if we zoom in for a moment to the bottom right, we see the cricket field, we see the clubhouse, we see the grandstand, and we see horse show grounds right next to the club, which was a separate entity also operated by Henry Houston, where they held an annual horse show for some time. We also see the Wissahickon Inn on the other side of Willow Grove Avenue here in the map. So zooming back out, this sketch shows the 9-hole routing along with hole names and distances, and it naturally sparks curiosity about where these holes sat. When we overlay this map on top of a current aerial view, we reveal the location of the original holes. So as you can see here, most of the golf course, and we're going to walk through it here in a second, most of the golf course did not sit on land occupied by the current golf course. It took several years and several stages, which we'll walk through here, to land on the current course that we play today. One quick note here as you look at this map, it's important to remember that Hartwell Lane existed at the time in 1895, as did Willow Grove Avenue on the bottom of this picture. But the other roads, St. Andrews Road, Cricket Street, Cherokee Street, and Glengarry Road, did not exist. So bear that in mind as we go through this. So we'll walk through the holes. The first hole was called Hartwell. The tee box sat behind the current 9th green. It played across Hartwell Lane to a green that sat at the top of the hill in the first fairway near the current location of the bunker on the right. Players would then turn left and play the second hole, which was called the long hole. It was 469 yards. It played downhill with a tee shot through Hergesheimer's Dairy. And if you played your tee shot and turned and looked back towards the tee box, this is what you would see. So hopefully your tee shot didn't hit any of the cows in the dairy as you're getting ready to play your second shot on the long hole. If you turned around and then played towards the green, played your second shot towards the green, this is your view, crossing Hartwell Lane with an uphill approach to the green. Now this photo is a photo that many of you may recognize. It's on the wall in multiple spots in the club. And you may have wondered, where is this? What hole is this? Well, now we know that this sort of famous picture in the history of the club is the original second hole where this poor gentleman got stuck in a ditch trying to get over the fence as he crossed Hartwell Lane. All right, looking up again here from the second green, players would then turn right to play the third hole, which was called Valley Green. That hole was 136 yards downhill, back across Hartwell Lane, to a green that sat at the bottom of the valley with a water hazard in front. The players would then turn left and see this. Again, a picture that many of you may have seen on our walls and wondered where this hole existed. This hole is the ditches, the original 4th hole in this 1895 routing. It played 263 yards along Hartwell Lane, which you can see there on the left with the white picket fence. And the tee shot played to a fairway across the ditch that you see here, which then flanked the right-hand side of the hole. We also have a photo from behind the green looking back. So from this view, it shows Hartwell Lane on the right. Again, you can see the white fence. It also shows that there was a second forced carry over a ditch in front of the green. Again, aptly named the ditches. If we zoom in on this photo, you'll notice that there's a flagstick here with the number 4. Now that flagstick is not a 5 or 6 foot high flagstick that we're used to today. It was probably only a couple feet high, but you can see that number 4, which confirms that this photo was taken between 1895 and 1897, because while this hole existed for 30 years, it was only the 4th hole for the first 3 years of the history of the course. We can also see in this photo, sort of deep in the background, we can see that the 3rd green is sitting in the distance. And we can also see on the right-hand side of the picture at the top of the hill, perhaps outside of the photo, would be the location of the 3rd tee, which really shows from this perspective that there was a sharp downhill drop shot to that 136-yard hole on the 3rd. From here, from the 4th hole, players would turn right and walk up a set of steps carved into the embankment to climb out of the valley and reach the 5th tee. Those steps still exist today as part of a public path that allowed people to access the Wissahickon trails. So players would reach a three-hole triangle starting with the 221-yard fifth hole, which was called the Maple. We don't have a picture of that hole, but players would turn left to play the sixth hole, which was 333 yards downhill, and it was called Bellevue for the beautiful view across the Wissahickon Valley, which you can see here. Even in black and white, really shows that the view was stunning. From there, players would turn back uphill to play the seventh hole, 264 yards, a hole that was called Old Sassafras, named after a tree near the green, as shown here. From that seventh green, from that triangle, players would walk back down the steps to play the eighth hole, which was 172 yards. It played uphill to a green at the crest, and it was called the Hill Hole, aptly named the Hill Hole. From there, the players would play the ninth hole, which was called the Inn, 323 yards, relatively flat, that finished with the green directly across the street from the Wissahickon Inn, shown here, that it would be sitting in left field of today's SEH baseball field. An important note here as we continue the story is that the valley holes, shown here as the third, fourth, and eighth holes in the original 1895 routing, continue to exist until 1925, and we're going to see that they were different. The holes were numbered differently over time. One quick note here to go back to this sketch of the original routing. One of the things you might notice is that the hole names that you see here, the hole names of the original routing, also appear on today's scorecard to honor the original routing. So if you've ever wondered why the second hole on our course, which is only 257 yards, if you've ever wondered why it's called Long Hole, well, now you know. It's called Long Hole because the original second hole of the 1895 routing was in fact a long hole at 469 yards. To provide a sense of time and style of 1895, here's a photo at about that time of a group of women with their golf clubs, along with their leather golf bags and their stylish dresses, along with their hats and bows. It's also important to remember that while we're talking about golf and the original golf course, at the time, again, the club was focused on cricket and on tennis, and tennis was very popular at the time. In fact, the Philadelphia Cricket Club was considered a leading club in the tennis world and hosted the Women's National Championships from 1887 to 1920. That's a different story for another day. So now we're on to 1898 and the expansion of the nine-hole course to 18 holes. The rudimentary nine-hole course proved to be successful, and golf's popularity within the club grew. To give you a sense of the growth, after golf was added in 1895, the club grew from 665 members to over 1,000 members by 1903. In March of 1898, construction of the 18-hole layout was approved by the board, and the club leased additional land to expand the footprint of the course. They leased additional land from the Houston family, and they retained Willie Tucker, shown here as a young man. In fact, he was only 26 years old when the club retained him. At the time, he was employed by the Philadelphia Country Club, where presumably he was involved in building that course and maintaining that course. The original blueprint of our 1898 routing has survived. You can see it here. A little bit torn, but we've managed to maintain it over the years. And the newly expanded Wissahickon Links was open for play on September 3rd, 1898, measuring almost 5,300 yards. If we overlay this map onto a modern aerial view, again, it reveals the location of the holes. So we'll walk through them. The first hole continued to play across Hartwell Lane, but the tee was shifted to the right to sit in its current location, while the green was a double green that was shared with the 17th hole. The second hole sat just to the right of today's second hole while playing a similar distance. The third hole was very similar to today's third hole, with the green located a little further back at the location of today's sixth green. That was a double green shared with the 15th hole. We see the valley holes in this routing have now been renumbered to the 6th, 7th, and 8th holes. And we can see that there are 9 holes that sat where homes exist today on and around St. Andrews Road. The 16th hole, we'll notice, is the same as today's 7th hole, which is interesting to see that the 7th hole, today's 7th hole, has existed since 1898. We will see that it evolved over the years, but again, today's 7th hole is the 1898 hole. And the 18th hole is similar to the 9th hole that we play today, but the tee was farther back. and it was a longer hole. There was a newspaper article in 1899 in the Philadelphia Times, which carried a story about the newly expanded 18-hole course, along with these terrific sketches that you see here. This is a piece that, again, you may see hanging on our walls. It's currently hanging in the study at the St. Martin's Clubhouse, and I encourage you to take 10 minutes or 15 minutes to read through it. It's a really terrific article. But to give you a sense of the time and place and what was happening, I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from this article. Off in the wildest sort of country, with the cares of the business world left behind, the Wissahickon Golf Course is now the scene of tramping golfers indulging in the royal and ancient game, which at one time was looked upon as a mere fad, but now the ever-growing army of golfers is pressing forward, and the end to which they may attain, no man dare say. The distant whistle of a railroad train may be heard occasionally as one looks over the wide extent of rolling country, and finding none of the hustling activity from which the golfer has, perhaps, just escaped. A few peaceful farmhouses dotted here and there, luxuriant fields, groves of trees, and a field or two of oats among the cultivated patches make up a scene restful and comforting to the eyes and nerves, and it is little wonder that the mighty golfers find their hearts content when driving the gutta percha over the links. The really terrific, just the wording and the writing is really terrific reminder of how different that time was. But it's really, really good stuff. All right, now we're on to 1899 to 1910, where the golf course continued to evolve. Once again, the club leased additional land from the Houston family to expand the footprint of the golf course throughout this period of time. Routing and hole length and hazards were continuously adjusted in response to congestion, improved player skill, and advances in technology such as the introduction of the Haskell ball in 1901. In the 1904 USGA Golf Bulletin, it noted that changes have been made to the golf course to remove the sameness at several of the holes. In the 1905 Spalding Official Golf Guide, it described the club as a cradle of golf in America, where more tournaments were held than all the other clubs combined. Shortly after this, the course was selected to host the 13th U.S. Open Championship in 1907. The 1907 U.S. Bulletin described the course as having unsurpassed natural beauty with a great variety of natural and artificial hazards. And the U.S. Open returned to the club for a second time in 1910. Now, I think as most folks know, the U.S. Open was held in 1907 and 1910 at the course. This is a story all by itself for another day. We'll simply say at this point that Alec Ross won in 1907. Alec Ross is the brother of Donald Ross. And Alex Smith, who was a luminary at the time, one of the true leaders in golf, won the U.S. Open in 1910 after a playoff with McDonald Smith, his younger brother, and Johnny McDermott, who went on to win the next two U.S. Opens. And of course, our annual member guest is called the Ross and Smith in honor of these champions. So the 1910 layout. Just a quick note, between the 1907 and 1910 U.S. Opens, there were minor renovations, but the course was largely the same. So walking through this 1910 layout, let's see what we observe. The first green has now moved to its current location, which completes its evolution into the hole we play today. In other words, our first hole in its entirety has been played in that configuration since 1907. The second hole is the hole we play today. The third hole is very similar to the hole we play today, but again, the green was further back. It was a longer hole, and the green was located at today's sixth green. There were new holes created for the fourth, fifth, and sixth holes in this routing, and we can see that the sixth hole was a dogleg that played around the valley of our current fifth hole. So when we play the current fifth hole, the par three, you can imagine that a tee sat behind that tee box, and play would go around that valley to a green that was further off in the distance. Again, a par four dogleg right. The valley holes are now the 8th, 9th, and 10th holes in this routing, so this is the third change to the numbering of the valley holes. There are 6 holes that sat where homes exist today on and around St. Andrews Road. One interesting footnote is the 12th hole and the 14th hole actually crossed. We can see that the 15th hole was similar to today's 7th hole, but the tee is pushed back 200 yards to make it a par 5. You can also see that the 16th was a short par 3. The 17th played in a similar distance with today's 8th hole with the green in the same location. And the 18th hole is very similar to today's ninth hole. Now, again, for historical context, the new St. Martin's Clubhouse was completed at about this time in 1910. So at about the time the 1910 U.S. Open was conducted, the clubhouse was just being completed. While we're on the subject of golf champions, it's important to recognize Florence Vanderbeck, who was a member of the Philadelphia Cricket Club and won the 1915 U.S. Women's Amateur, finishing as a semifinalist 6 additional times. So to this day, she is the first and only PCC member, man or woman, to win a national golf championship. So certainly very notable. All right, on to the next stage. So in 1913, the club learned of plans for a boulevard and bridge that was going to connect the main line to Roxborough and onward to Chestnut Hill, with a bridge that would cross the Wissahickon Creek and the boulevard that passed directly through the club. What that would do, if it had taken place, would force the relocation of the St. Martin's Golf Course. So in response at the time, and again, this is 1913, the club attempted to secure land for a new golf course on the other side of the Wissahickon Creek. They tried a couple different locations, but ultimately did not secure suitable land for a course. But after receiving assurances that the boulevard and bridge would not be built for at least 5 years, the club retained Donald Ross in 1914 to modernize the course, which was at risk of becoming outdated as a result of longer and more strategic, the demand for longer and more strategic holes. Ross oversaw major renovations and provided additional length, added strategic hazards, and recontoured the greens. We have a scorecard from that routing, which is terrific, a terrific little piece of history. So here's the front of the scorecard from that time. And there are a couple of interesting things. For example, the buying of balls by members or guests from boys on the golf course is absolutely prohibited. Interesting to see that. They have a stymie measure, so that tells us that this card was 6 inches wide and was used to measure stymies. And there was the largest message on here is to replace the turf. So replacing divots, of course, has been an issue since 1914 and all those years since. Here's the back of the scorecard, which shows several holes, and we're going to go through these, but the overall length was just over 6,000 yards, 6,050 yards, which was about 100 yards longer than the 1907 and 1910 U.S. Open routings. By comparison, the 1898 routing was 5,300 yards. So again, the course is gradually getting longer. All right, so here's the Donald Ross layout overlaid on a modern aerial. So let's take a look through it. So the first, second, and third holes were the same as the 1910 routing, while Ross added some bunkers and recontoured the greens. We can notice on the scorecard here that the first and second were about the same yardage as today's course, and the third was similar to the hole we played today, but again with the green located at the current 6th green, and we can see that the third hole was 460 yards long and a par 5. New holes were created for the 4th, 5th, and 6th holes. The 4th hole was 200 yards long. We can see that the green was very close to the current 4th green. The 6th hole was a 525-yard par 5 dogleg right, and it was the #1 handicap. So that was, I'm sure it was a terrific hole that's sort of been lost to history. We can also see that the 7th hole continued to be a short dogleg right, 270 yards, that continue to play around the current 5th hole, the valley at the current 5th hole. Once again, the valley holes, the original valley holes, now become the 11th, 12th, and 13th holes in this routing. 6 holes sat where homes exist today on and around St. Andrews Road. Notice number 10 there is a hole that runs directly up what is now St. Andrews Road. It was a 500-yard par 5. The 16th hole, which had played as the 15th in the 1910 routing, remained a long par 5 at 570 yards uphill. So that's quite a long hole, 570 yards uphill at the time in 1914. 17th and 18th are the same as our 8th and 9th holes today. Oops, 17th and 18th are the same as our 8th and 9th holes today. And we can see on the scorecard that the 18th was a par 3 playing 230 yards. Okay, so now we're on to 1925. And while the club played an important role back in those early days, in the early years of golf in America, and while Donald Ross's renovations were received positively at first, the original course was becoming too short due to advances in the golf clubs and the golf ball. Meanwhile, Tillinghast was a leading voice and proponent of finding a new location to build a championship caliber course. Facing the expiration of the lease in 1924, along with uncertainty about the boulevard and bridge displacing the golf course, plus concerns about the course becoming obsolete due to advances in ball and club technology, the club began seeking additional property to build a championship course. That culminated in 1920 with the acquisition of 375 acres of farmland, the Yekel Estate, in Flowertown. With enough land to build two courses, the club initially built one course, designed by Tillinghast and opened on July 4th, 1922. Today, we refer to this course as the Wissahickon course in honor of the original course at St. Martin's. Meanwhile, the Donald Ross routing at St. Martin's continued to exist for 3 more years. So, for those 3 years, 1922 to 1925, the club had two 18-hole golf courses. And in 1925, a new lease was established with a reduced footprint where the St. Martin's course, which it had come to be known by then, was reduced to 9 holes. So how did that reduction take place? The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th holes that we just talked about in the 1914 routing were abandoned. The holes closest to the Wissahickon, the 8th, 9th, and 15th, were abandoned. And the Valley holes, which have been played continuously for 30 years since the original 1895 layout, were abandoned. The 10th, 14th, and 16th holes were adjusted to create number 5, number 6, and number 7. The 17th and 18th holes became the 8th and 9th holes. And at the time, in a newspaper, the 9th hole was described as, quote, a hard par 3 affair measuring 227 yards, which requires a carry over a sunken lane and is heavily trapped. Number 1, number 2, and number 3 were not changed relative to the Donald Ross routing. According to another newspaper article at about that time, trapping, quote, trapping was brought up to date and the old chocolate drops that used to dot the terrain were removed, unquote. The 4th hole was a new hole that was added, 200 yards, to connect the 3rd green to the 5th tee and complete this 9-hole routing. Which brings us to the first really good quality aerial view of the golf course. This is from 1939, still showing the 1925 routing, which existed until 1963. You can see here where those holes existed and what the numbers of the holes were. You can see the 4th hole in the foreground. You can see on number 3, we can see cross bunkers and a green that was located at today's 6th green. Again, we can see number 4 in the foreground connecting number 3 to number 5. And we can see the 5th hole, which was a 487-yard par 4, running uphill along what is today St. Andrews Road. The total yardage of this 9-hole layout was just under 3,200 yards, and the par was 37. Ahead to 1963, when the 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were given up for the construction of homes on St. Andrews Road, Glengarry Road, and Cherokee Street. And in their place, today's 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were built. So if we start again from the 1925 routing for reference, this is what we just looked at. The 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were abandoned. The 3rd hole, which had played to the current location of the 6th green since 1898, was shortened by building a new green that sits at today's green location just past the cross bunkers. And the new 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were created, again, with the original 3rd green becoming the 6th green. Another great aerial. This is in the early 60s, at the time that the new holes were just being constructed. We can see that Glengarry Road is starting to take shape. We can see that the 4th, 5th, and 6th holes are still in existence. And we can see in yellow here on the left where the new 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were being grown in. Just a couple years later, another aerial view just after 1963, after the completion of those new holes. We can see that the roads are now complete. You can see Glengarry Road across the top and St. Andrews running across the bottom, with Cherokee running up through this picture. And homes are beginning to appear. We can also see remnants of the old holes. We can see the old 4th green and the old 6th green. You can also see that the new 3rd green is in place just past the cross bunkers. And again, we can see the new holes, the new 4th, 5th, and 6th holes, which completes the evolution of the routing to the course that we play today. Now we roll the clock forward 50 years. Over the years, over that period of time, the St. Martin's course deteriorated due to a lack of irrigation and a limited maintenance budget. That lack of irrigation, along with poor drainage, led to poor course conditions. But meanwhile, in Flowertown, the construction and opening of the Militia Hill course in 2002 was a transformational event in the history of the club. It drove the expansion of the membership, which in turn created a strong financial foundation to reinvest in all aspects of the club facilities over the next 20 plus years. In 2011, the club developed a restoration plan to return the Wissahickon course, that is the 1922 Tillinghast course, to its rightful place as one of America's greatest golf courses. And this also created an opportunity to simultaneously develop a restoration plan for the St. Martin's course. Both of these were led by Dan Mearsman under the guidance of our architect, Keith Foster. The restoration of St. Martin's in 2012 and 2013 took place a full year before the restoration of Wissahickon, as shown here, and demonstrated how impactful a renovation could be. Here is a picture of the 9th hole before the renovation. Here is a picture after. The course was completely regrassed with golden zoysia, which allowed year-long play. We added new irrigation, rebuilt tees and bunkers, and rebuilt and expanded the green complexes. Much of the work was done in-house by our team, led by Dan Mearsman, which provided our team with a unique opportunity to develop their skills that they utilized on the restoration of the Wissahickon course just a year later. Once again worthy of its history, the St. Martin's course is now regarded as one of the best short courses in the United States. In 2015, the club purchased the land where the St. Martin's golf course sits. Now, this is an important and easily overlooked chapter in the history of the course, but we didn't want to overlook it. We really wanted to make this part of the story. Now, to put this into context, we first have to go back and acknowledge the Houston and Woodward family. So remember, Henry Houston, starting in 1883, provided the initial land to give the club its first home. And since that time, the Houston and Woodward family have been instrumental and indispensable benefactors at many stages in the history of the club, including Samuel Houston, Gertrude Houston Woodward, and her husband, Dr. George Woodward, and their descendants. So from the outset, the Philadelphia Cricket Club was an integral part of Henry Houston's vision of the Wissahickon Heights community, complete with a train line, the Wissahickon Inn, and handsome homes as an escape from the city. Houston's descendants continued supporting the club at various stages over time to help the club grow, to provide needed financing, and in some instances, ensure the club's survival. Throughout the history of the St. Martin's course, the portion of the golf course that is on the other side of Hartwell Lane was owned by the Houston and Woodward family and leased to the club on favorable terms as the course footprint evolved. And we've seen several times here through this story where the footprint expanded incrementally. Each time that happened, the course leased additional land from the Houston and Woodward family. Starting in 2011 under Al Thorell's presidency at the club and culminating in 2015 under Michael Breguer's leadership, the club collaborated with the Woodward and Houston family to purchase the golf course land, which is 41 acres on the other side of Hartwell Lane, under a land conservation easement, thereby securing control of the golf course land on behalf of the membership, securing our investment into its improvement, and preserving the course as green space in perpetuity. The Woodward and Houston family donated the proceeds of that sale to 3 local charities, including Natural Lands Trust, the Chestnut Hill Historical Society, and the Church of St. Martin in the Fields. The sale was completed on December 30th, 2015, and here we have a photo of George Woodward III, along with Charles Woodward and Mike Breguer, along with representatives from Natural Lands Trust, the Chestnut Hill Historical Society, and Church of St. Martin in the Fields. In the spirit of Houston's original vision, the club maintains a public walking path in collaboration with Natural Lands Trust that connects the Chestnut Hill community and the golf course, as shown here on the right-hand side of the third hole. The trail is in the trees there. And it connects Chestnut Hill and the golf course with the trails of Fairmount Park surrounding the Wissahickon Creek. So today's course, in the context of all this, the course that we play today includes elements from nearly every version of the course. The opening hole is played across Hartwell Lane since the original 1895 layout, and the location of the first tee dates to 1898. The green location has existed since the 1907 US Open, so we can say with confidence that this is a US Open hole. The second hole, and today's tee and green location of the second hole, emerged in the years leading up to the 1907 US Open. So again, you can say that the second hole is a US Open hole. The third hole dates back to the 1898 routing. The cross bunkers were added in the years leading up to the 1907 US Open. From 1898 to 1963, the green was located at today's sixth green. This photo actually is a great way to show it. You can see the sixth green toward the top of this photo across Cherokee Road. So again, the third hole played to that sixth green location from 1898 to 1963. In 1963, the current green was constructed to accommodate the construction of Cherokee Street. And again, we can say that this is a US Open hole, except for the green, which has been moved to a different location. Here we have today's fourth, fifth, and sixth holes. And if we think about this portion of the property and we reflect on everything we've shown here today, this portion of the property was used in the 1907 and 1910 US Open routing. It was also used in the 1914 Ross routing. It was not used from 1925 until 1963. And as we just discussed, in 1963, these four holes, the fourth, fifth, and sixth holes, were built to replace the fourth, fifth, and sixth holes from the 1925 routing. Again, as we've mentioned several times, the current location of the sixth green, the current sixth green, has been a green site continuously since 1898. The seventh hole and today's tee, fairway, and green location date back to 1898 when it was originally the 16th hole. As we talked about in the years leading up to the 1907 US Open, the tee was moved back 200 yards to turn it into a 570-yard uphill par 5. While today's fairway and green location were used in those US Opens. In 1925, the hole was shortened again to the original 1898 layout and became the seventh hole that we play today. The eighth hole is played in a similar location and to a similar yardage as on every scorecard that we have dating back to 1905. In fact, it was the 17th hole through most of those years. But again, the hole itself dates back to at least 1905. So we can say again with confidence that this is a US Open hole. And finally, the ninth hole is played across Hartwell Lane, and returned to the clubhouse as far back as 1898 when it was the 18th hole. So again, we can say that this is a US Open hole. So wrapping up with some final comments, zooming out here, the club has been an integral part of the Chestnut Hill community and Houston's vision for Wissahickon Heights starting in 1883. The St. Martin's course, in turn, has been an integral part of the Philadelphia Cricket Club since 1895. With the 2013 restoration and the 2015 land purchase, the St. Martin's course and its rich history stretching back to 1895 will remain an integral part of the Philadelphia Cricket Club and the Chestnut Hill community for generations to come. So we're going to start to take some questions here. I will mention that we will share the recording of this presentation. We showed a lot of information. You might want to watch it again. We will share the recording. And we have been taking questions in the chat. So at this point, I'll ask Powell and Rob, have there been any questions that you guys want to highlight?
One of the questions that Andrew Carr asked about, was there an architect that the club worked with during the 1960s changes to the course? At this point, we never found any direct reference to an architect that was overseeing those changes. We do know that the club was working with William and David Gordon in the 1960s at Flowertown, and there's a likelihood that they also would have helped us out at St. Martin's, but we do not have anything uh, concrete to prove that.
Sounds good.
Chris, Nick Marolo is kind of asking how our committee was able to piece together the history of the course when we don't have complete plans or a lot of photos from that era. Do you want to touch
Well,
on that a little bit?
I think you're the best person to answer that. So again, what I would say for the audience here is that Rob really did all this research, and what we did here with this presentation is bring it together in a cohesive way so we could tell the story and reconstruct it. But Rob, I think you're best suited to answer that.
Uh, Thanks, Chris. So we essentially had aerial photographs starting in 1928, and moving forward from there every 5 to 10 years, that really allowed us to see the evolution of the nine-hole course. We also had the sketch from 1895 that Chris showed on the first slide with the original holes, the rudimentary nine-hole course. Um, we used a combination of newspaper articles, scorecards, kind of coupled with Google Earth to really work backwards from that 1928 aerial, which, while it showed the nine-hole course that was being played in 1928, it also showed remnants of Donald Ross's 1914 course that had just closed just 3 years prior. So using all of these documents that were available to us and Google Earth to, I guess, confirm hole lengths and locations, we were able to pretty much confirm every iteration of the course that was not photographed from 1895 to 1928.
The
So
only
it
thing I would add
was.
to that, the only thing I would just add one more thing to build on that is some of those maps and sketches that we had certain anchors that we could use as reference points. Anchors would include Willow Grove Avenue, Hartwell Lane, the cricket pitch, the clubhouse. So these were things that we could use by taking those elements and combining it with what exists today in aerials to get a pretty good approximation of where the holes sat.
I think that brings up a question that Barb raised, which is the uncovering of the stairs, which were part of the original routing that still exist.
Yeah, I think different people have different stories here. I can tell you my story. Once we found that 1898 Senate Prosper Senate book and we overlaid it onto an aerial view, that original sketch. In fact, I'll just run back to it. It was an interesting little moment in history. Sorry, this will only take a second. Almost there. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the original. Sorry, it's further back than I realized. Okay, one more. All right, so this was in the 1898 book. You can actually see the steps a little hashed out right here up this embankment. So one day I climbed out. There's a parking lot there. You can park a couple cars and there's a trail. And again, it's public access. So I walked up there and found that there are still steps, making its way right up through here and coming out to a public access pathway that leads you uh, right into St. Andrews Road at approximately where the fifth tee would have been. So again, that's a public path. So check it out.
Steve Spross from works over at St. Martin's in the shop over there. Wanted to know the history of the building there, the starter shack, the oaks near the first tee. That's honestly something we haven't done much research on, Steve, but I love to follow up with you on that.
As we go through these questions in the chat, and we'd also welcome anyone to unmute yourself and raise any additional questions. We'd be happy to answer to the best of our ability.
Scrolling up, S. Wade was asking about surviving reports of the 1907 and 1910 U.S. Opens. The USGA does keep an archive of essentially any media coverage from major tournaments, and we have copies of that in our digital archives. We there were no, if I recall, there were no direct quotes from players discussing the golf course. There was some commentary from A.W. Tillinghast, who was a member and participated in one of those tournaments. That essentially the course was a bit short for what they were looking for, um, and it kind of perpetuated his narrative that we needed a longer golf course, and where we eventually settled in Flowertown. Um, but those reports did not have any direct quotes from players.
Chris,
Yes, hey,
I
Fran.
see there's a comment about how do you locate the stairs? And if I might be able to just say, if you were, say, coming off the sixth green and you made a right on Cherokee Street and you just kept walking and you cross over St. Andrews, you will see between two homes a very small, narrow path that you can walk along, and that will take you down the steps, down the embankment, down to where that then connects in with the trailhead and the parking lot
Yep.
off the end of Hartwell Lane.
Yep, that's true. And or you could park near SCH. And again, there's a little parking area there by the trail, and you can go bottom up instead of top down. So either way works.
And you kind of can envision where the green was down there
You
on
really
that lower
can.
level.
You really can. It's pretty neat to see. All right. Again, we're happy to open the floor here if anyone wants to unmute and raise a question. Okay, so let's then we'll just go on and wrap up. So before I hand back over to Fran here, I just want to quickly mention from a perspective of the Heritage Committee, we're always interested in acquiring any historical documents, any photographs, and any artifacts that any of you or anyone else may have that helps us reconstruct and preserve the history of the Philadelphia Cricket Club. So feel free to contact us either at our general email address, heritage@philacricket.com, or feel free to reach out to any one of us, Pal, Rob, John Burns, or myself. So with that said, once again, thank you to the 1854 Foundation to give us this opportunity to tell this story. Thank you for listening to our story. And Fran, back over to you.
Sure. Chris, Rob, Pal, what an amazing and informative presentation. We're just we have such a rich history here at the Philadelphia Cricket Club, and we are so thankful that you and the Heritage Committee could bring this alive for us. And on behalf of the 1854 Foundation, thank you. And we hope everyone enjoyed the evening, and we look forward to bringing you the next program in March and to your continued support. Please visit the website and do drop us your ideas for topics that are of interest to you. Good evening, everyone.